Welcome back to Art Practice ASMR. This is week 1 of Inktober 2019. If you're unfamiliar with Inktober, basically for the entire month of October, I'm going to be doing one ink drawing a day based off of a list of prompts designated for each day of the month. If you want to follow along with me, the list of prompts I'm doing are Creeptober by Omega Black on Twitter. This year, I'm going to be showing all of the footage in this video, but I'm going to be telling a scary story in each video I release. So sit back, curl up with a blanket, and get ready to get scared, because today's story is the story of the Smiling Man. About 5 years ago, I lived downtown in a major city in the US. I've always been a night person, so I would often find myself bored after my roommate, who was decidedly not a night person, went to sleep. To pass the time, I used to go for long walks and spend the time thinking. I spent 4 years like that, walking alone at night, and never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommate that even the drug dealers in the city were polite. But all of that changed in just a few minutes one evening. It was a Wednesday, somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, and I was walking near the police-patrolled park quite a ways from my apartment. It was a quiet night, even for a weeknight, with very little traffic and almost no one on foot. The park, as it was most nights, was completely empty. I turned down a short side street in order to loop back to my apartment when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street on my side was a silhouette of a man, dancing. It was a strange dance, similar to a waltz, but he finished each box with an odd forward stride. I guess you could say he was dance walking, headed straight for me. Deciding he was probably drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him the majority of the sidewalk to pass me by. The closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky, and wearing an old suit. He danced closer still until I could make out his face. His eyes were open wide and wild, head tilted back slightly, looking off at the sky. His mouth was formed in a painfully wide cartoon of a smile. Between the eyes and the smile, I decided to cross the street before he danced any closer. I took my eyes off him to cross the empty street. As I reached the other side, I glanced back, and then stopped dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing, and was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me, but still looking skyward. Smile still wide on his lips. I was completely and utterly unnerved by this. I started walking again, but kept my eyes on the man. He didn't move. Once I had put about a half a block between us, I turned away from him for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me. The street and the sidewalk ahead were completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to where he had been, to find him gone. For the briefest of moments, I felt relieved, until I noticed him. He had crossed the street and was now slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure due to the distance and the shadows, but I was certain he was facing me. I had looked away from him for no more than 10 seconds, so it was clear that he had moved fast. I was so shocked that I stood there for some time, staring at him. And then he started moving toward me again. He took giant, exaggerated, tiptoed steps, as if he were some cartoon character sneaking up on someone. Except he was moving very, very quickly. I'd like to say at this point I ran away, or pulled out my pepper spray, or my cell phone, or anything at all. But I didn't. I just stood there, completely frozen as the smiling man crept towards me. And then he stopped again, about a car length away from me, still smiling his smile, still looking to the sky. When I finally found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. What I meant to ask was, "What the fuck do you want?" in an angry, commanding tone. What came out was a whimper. What the fuck? Regardless of whether or not humans can smell fear, they can certainly hear it. I heard it in my own voice, and that only made me more afraid. But he didn't react to it at all. He just stood there, smiling. And then, after what felt like forever, he turned around, very slowly, and started dance walking away, just like that. Not wanting to turn my back to him again, I watched him go, until he was far enough away to almost be out of sight. And then I realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror as the distant shape of him grew larger and larger. He was coming back my way, and this time, he was running. I ran too. I ran until I was off the side road and back onto a better lit road with sparse traffic. Looking behind me then, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of the way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see his stupid smile, but he was never there. I lived in that city for 6 months after that night, and I never went out for another walk. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk, he didn't look high. He looked completely and utterly insane. And that is a very, very scary thing to see. Okay, so that story was a lot shorter than I remembered it being. So I think what I'm going to do, because I have a ton of time left in this video, is that I'm going to read another top story from Let's Not Meet. If you don't know what Let's Not Meet is, it's a subreddit where people tell stories about creepy encounters they've had. This is a pretty good story, but it has a lot of grammatical errors, so the sentences sound weird and it's actually pretty hard to read. I've already tried recording this and, as you can tell, it's not making it into that video. This story is called "I Told a Serial Killer to Fuck Off." In 2006, I was a college student at ASU. I lived in an off-campus apartment on the ground floor, and it was a block off a major street here in Phoenix called Baseline. These details are important. In the summer of 2006, Phoenix, Arizona was plagued by 2 serial killers. One was the Phoenix shooter, who ended up being a team of 2 guys randomly shooting people. The other was the Baseline killer, a rapist and murderer. Having 2 serial killers put the entire city on edge, and everyone was talking about it. I even saw articles in Time or Newsweek about the situation. So the fall 2006 semester had just started. Now, you may have heard this, but Phoenix is hot in August. It would get stuffy in my apartment, so I'd leave the window cracked a little because the morning air is nice. The blinds provided visual cover. Anyway, One morning, a strange sound woke me up. It was the crack of dawn, 4:45 a.m., and the sun was just barely coming up. It was the sound of someone lightly tapping on the window, and it seemed intentional. In my tired state, I feared it could be a bird or some branches or something trivial. Tap, tap, tap. Silence. After about 90 seconds of nothing, the tapping returned, and it was absolutely purposeful. I was positive it was a human producing this noise. I thought it was my boyfriend, who thought it was cute to try and scare me sometimes. I decided I'd be a bit of a brat and make him wait, but I was also getting really angry. How dare he pull a prank on me when I'm trying to sleep? This is just like him. I'm going to give him a piece of my mind about disturbing my sleep like this. Tap, tap, tap. At a certain point, I got up to get a glass of water, still being in the mindset of wanting to annoy my stupid boyfriend who thought this would be funny. But I saw some movement through the slit in the blinds, and I marched over and yanked the blinds so I could see. Definitely not my boyfriend. I said very loudly, "What the fuck?" He seemed sort of taken aback by my anger, but only slightly. The man I saw will be with me forever, or more specifically, his eyes, and the feeling they gave me were insanely creepy. Honestly, words can't do justice how terrifying they were. Honestly, words can't do justice to how terrifying his eyes were. That was written really weirdly. They looked like black orbs with no white in them. Absolutely predatory. When I see pictures of Ted Bundy or Charles Manson, that's exactly what he looked like. Even if you saw a picture of how they looked, it's different when you experience it in person. It totally floored me. Something about this man was profoundly wrong. He was crouched down, like an umpire. He had on dark pants, a dark purple shirt, and a dark Nike hat. He had dark skin. I thought he was Hispanic, but later I found out he was a light-skinned black guy. Anyway, after I yelled "what the fuck" at him, he whispers to me, "Can I talk to you?" If you want to know how insanely creepy that is to hear, just whisper that sentence out loud to yourself right now. It still sends chills down my spine when I think about how that sounded. His hand subtly moved towards his waist. I later learned he would blitz tag his victims, and he probably had a gun. All that separated us was a mesh screen. Now, this is about a 30-second interaction at this point. For some reason, I thought of Ted Bundy and how he'd pretend to be crippled to get his victims. I thought of my mom telling me not to be nice to strangers. Don't be afraid to be a bitch. My thinking wasn't as calculated as all that, but it was more the nano-processing of how to deal with the situation. So, when he whispered that, I started yelling at him, "Hell no, get the fuck out of here, douchebag." I shut the window angrily and locked it. I can't overemphasize how incredibly irritated I was that this person had the audacity to disturb my precious sleep. I laid back down and wondered if I'd been too mean. What if he needed help? But that didn't actually make sense. Why would he be, like, tapping and whispering if he was truly in trouble? I decided he was a creep after all. I was too annoyed to go back to sleep, but I sort of laid back down. I told my roommate about an hour later, and she sort of jokingly asked if it could have been the baseline killer. When she said that, my heart sank. His face looked exactly like it did in the police sketches on the billboards everywhere. That was also written really weirdly. The only problem is that those billboards showed him with dreads, and the man at my window had no dreads. Apparently he was some sort of disguise artist who'd wear wigs. Updating the police sketch would have been a nice move, but they didn't. I called the Phoenix police, and the detective I talked to agreed that it sounded like his MO. The suspect would say something to throw off the target, and then he'd blitz attack. The detective said that my angry response probably made me seem like too much of a hassle and moved on. The only problem was that I thought the guy looked Hispanic, and the detective said many witnesses described him as black. I thought they might want to come out and try for samples or surveillance footage or something, but I didn't hear back from the detective. My parents freaked out. They got us knives, pepper spray, and put up signs. Some people asked why I didn't get a gun. I can't remember why I didn't at the time, but I remember it being something I was open to when my dad brought it up. We learned another tenant had complained the same morning. I never learned the details, but this idiot was apparently going around the damn complex trying to find a target. The stupid apartment wouldn't let us out of our lease, so we moved to the second floor apartment right above our old unit. Side note, the neighbors who moved into our old unit were horrible. Obnoxious tweakers who would do meth and play pitbull on repeat for hours, and have knife fights at 11 a.m. on weekdays. There were times I wondered if they might be worse than the actual serial killer who came to my window. So that unit was cursed somehow. Anyway, on September 4th, 2006, they arrested Mark Godot. I think the detective didn't call me back because they were days away from arresting Godot. When I saw his mugshot, I was sick but also relieved. He was absolutely the guy outside my window. To me, he looked like he could be Hispanic. You can judge for yourself if you Google it. He's on death row in Arizona right now. His wife tried to mount some campaign to show that the police were framing him for something. On a personal level, it certainly would make for an interesting coincidence if this poor, innocent man who they framed was also whispering like a creep and tapping on my window. The other cool thing about the story is that I had a really bad eating disorder at the time, and about 8 months after this happened, I got in solid recovery. I never would have experienced how wonderful life could be if the slightest thing would have changed that morning in 2006. I can't think of something more scary than a serial killer tapping on your window. That actually happened to me, and if it happens to you, just scare them right back. Don't be afraid to downright rude at someone who's injecting themselves into your space. It could save your life if you're not afraid to throw your weight around and tell someone off. Trust yourself. You can still be a kind, generous person and still tell someone to fuck off. I think this is a really good story, but it has way too many grammatical errors to be something that's even remotely easy to read aloud like this. I'm gonna try to edit this out, edit all the mistakes out, but that was pretty hard to read. Okay, this last story I'm going to read is one I haven't read yet, so we're going to see if this is a good story together. This is called Creepy Dude in the Pharmacy with a Weird Fetish. This happened maybe 10 years ago when I was in my early 30s. I was standing in line at the local pharmacy to get my prescriptions. This is a small town and I'm a regular there, so they know me on sight. I was behind a couple of others in the line, and there were a couple of people behind me. I kept feeling a tickle in my hair on the back of my head, but every time I looked behind me, the guy there was a few steps back and looking at the floor. This happened several times by the time I was at the front of the line. The pharmacist told me she wanted to talk to me about my medication in the consultation room they had at the time. I thought this was weird because we both knew I had been on this medication for years and would be for life. Nothing new. I get back to the room and close the door. She comes in from the door and the other side that leads from the pharmacy. She told me that the man behind me had been stepping forward, sticking his nose in my hair and smelling, before stepping back and looking at the floor. This shook me pretty badly as this is such a weird behavior, especially in my little town. The pharmacy insisted on having me wait there until the guy was distracted by another pharmacy employee, and they had a security guard walk me to my car and watch me drive off, to make sure I was gone before a hair sniffer came out to see what I was driving and in which direction I was going. I still use this pharmacy, and some of the same people still work there. I'll always be grateful that they took the time and initiative to make sure I was safe that day. That was a pretty weird story. So there is still a lot of time left in this video, but I don't think there's enough to tell another story. So I think I'm just going to talk for a little bit until this video's over. First off, I hope everybody enjoyed this video. I don't remember how many subscribers I had last year when I did Inktober, but I know that my Inktober videos got very few views, and I think a lot of that was my fault. I had no way to make them interesting, and I honestly didn't really know what to talk about in those videos. That's why for each week of Inktober this year, I'm going to be telling a different story or set of stories in each video. This week it ended up being a bunch of Let's Not Meet stories, but I'm thinking of doing some creepypastas in future videos. Maybe I'll read from famous classic horror stories. If anybody has any suggestions, just leave them in the comments and I'll find whatever story you want me to read and I'll read it. I think the last week of October on Halloween, I'm going to tell a true ghost story from my life. So look forward to that. So far, I've really enjoyed Inktober this year. My first year was pretty challenging, but still kind of fun. But this year, I know I've only done 4 drawings so far, but it's been really, really enjoyable and a nice challenge. I think it's probably because my skills have improved, somehow in the past year. So, now that this video is almost done, I would like to thank everybody for watching this. If you made it to the end, then that's amazing. If you like this video, then give it a like. If you want to see more, then subscribe. If you want to see more high quality versions of the pictures I've drawn in this video, check out my social media in the links below. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.